Howdy folks, and welcome to another episode of Mingles with Jingles. Let's have a little chat about the Epic Store, because it's been in the headlines lately for all the wrong reasons, and it really amuses me. First of all, I don't have anything against the Epic Store in principle. I think having a competitor to Steam is a good thing. God knows Steam could use some competition. And I don't really count things like Origin, Electronic Arts storefront, because screw Electronic Arts. Similarly, Bethesda's storefront, Uplay from Ubisoft. These aren't really games stores in the way that Steam is, because you can only buy Electronic Arts games on Origin, Bethesda games on their storefront, and Ubisoft games on Uplay. Anybody can release a game on Steam, and that's kind of Steam's problem. I'm recording this on Sunday the 2nd of June. In the month of June to date, that's 2 days, there have been at least 50 new games released on Steam. And I use the word games advisedly because most of them are nothing more than lazy asset flips. You've never heard of them, you probably never will hear of them. And they're destined to just sink without trace. But it's that signal to noise ratio. It makes it real difficult unless you're just browsing the shop storefront on Steam. Or unless you know exactly what game you're looking for. It's really difficult to find something that's been made with any degree of care, love and attention. It's really difficult for an indie developer to actually make their game successful. It used to be the case, many years ago now, that if you were an indie developer and you managed to get your game onto Steam, you were basically guaranteed, if your game was any good, that it was going to do well, because it was going to get noticed, just by nature of the fact that it had been accepted onto Steam. Well, those days are long gone. Indie developers with actual good games now pretty much have to rely on word of mouth, because just getting your game accepted onto Steam it's no big deal. Anybody can get their game published on Steam. Now, the Epic Game Store doesn't have that problem. Yet. Give it some time. Let it become a bit more successful. And, well, you never know. But at the moment, at least, if you're looking for a game on the Epic Games Store, it's probably going to be something that people have actually given a shit about at some point during the development process. And of course, you've got all of the high-profile Epic Store exclusives, like, for example, Metro Exodus, to name but one. Oh yes, the exclusives. We'll talk about the exclusives in a moment, but I don't actually have a problem with any developer that decides that they want to sell their game on the Epic Store, because Epic, give them credit, does give the developers a much, much better deal than Valve does with Steam. A developer who chooses to sell their game on the Epic Store gets a much bigger slice of the pie than they would if they were trying to sell the same game through Valve on Steam. So it's clearly a no-brainer for a developer. And what this is basically Epic waving their wallet around. Don't forget, Epic are the developers of Fortnite, the most popular game on the planet. They're sitting on a mountain of cash, and they're using it to try to corner the market on the big upcoming games releases. Games like Metro Exodus, which I didn't really care about. I mean, it seemed like a very, very good game, but I was kind of busy at the time. Plus, I was watching people playing it on Twitch. Games like Phoenix Point. You may not have heard of Phoenix Point. I mean, I did do a video on it, an early access video. But if you've been a fan of games like XCOM or UFO, Enemy Unknown, then you probably have heard of Phoenix Point, because it's been developed by Julian Gollop. Julian Gollop, of course, the guy who created the original Laser Squad, on which the XCOM and UFO games are all based. Phoenix Point is going to be an Epic Store exclusive for the first year of its release. But hang on a minute. Isn't Phoenix Point crowdfunded? Yes, it was. It was until Epic Games waved a big fat paycheck at Julian Gollop and said, Epic Store exclusive? And he said, show me the money. And now it's not a crowdfunded game anymore. But what about everybody who backed the game on Kickstarter? Well, they've been promised that they'll get any DLC released in the first year of the game for free, but people are still upset about it. And yet, it's difficult to get mad at the developer of a crowdfunded game who has a lifeline tossed to them in the shape of a big fat paycheck from the Epic Games Store in return for a year's exclusivity. Because that's basically guaranteed the development of the game. It's guaranteed sales of the game. And it's also guaranteed the money to continue to develop the game after release. So what about other Epic Store exclusives? I have to admit, looking at the list of Epic Store exclusive games, I haven't even heard of most of them. Ancestors, The Humankind Odyssey, After Party, Ashen, Borderlands 3. Wait, what? Borderlands 3 is an Epic Store exclusive. I'm guessing some serious money is changing hands over that one, because I don't really see Gearbox Software as a struggling independent developer. And until the announcement of games like Phoenix Point and Borderlands 3 being Epic Store exclusives, I didn't really care, because I don't actually have an account at the Epic Store. Again, not because I have anything against the Epic Store on principle, but for two main reasons. I've already got a Steam account, an Origin account, a Uplay account, a Bethesda.net account. I just couldn't be bothered with the whole creating yet another account, password and login and all the crap that goes with it for yet another storefront. Especially since, reason number 2, that storefront wasn't actually selling anything that I gave a shit about. Ooh, Metro Exodus looks quite good. Epic Store exclusive. Nah, fuck it. Can't be bothered. It's just... that was it. That was the reason I didn't get and play Metro Exodus. I mean, I've played some of the other Metro games, and they are very, very good. And Metro Exodus certainly looked good. But as soon as I realised that I was going to have to create an Epic Store account, I just couldn't be bothered. And I just watched other people play it on Twitch. And I think that's part of the problem that Epic have been struggling to overcome. Because there are so many different online stores, so much competition, that if they're going to make the Epic Store a success, they were going to have to do two things. They were going to have to attract the developers, and they've done that by offering them a bigger slice of the pie for any sales of their games, but they were also going to have to attract some of those big ticket games. Games like Metro Exodus, which I didn't really care about. I didn't care enough about. Games like Phoenix Point and Borderlands 3, which I do actually care enough about. Now, what Epic are doing is expensive. I mean, they're making less money because more of it's going to the developers on every sale of every game in the Epic Store. And they're also, obviously, offering some seriously good deals to people like Gearbox Software, the developers of Borderlands 3, to tie their game to the Epic storefront as an exclusive as well. But they quite clearly have that money because they're Epic Games. They're the developers of Fortnite. So they're sitting on a mountain of cash. Now, the reason they're doing this, I suspect, is exactly because of people like me. People who just couldn't be arsed with yet another storefront. I was never going to bother with the Epic Games Store. Unless there was a game available on the Epic Store that I wanted, like Borderlands 3, and I couldn't get anywhere else. It's a bit like when Sony first released the PlayStation. It was way cheaper than the Nintendo. Sony basically didn't make any money. They were effectively selling PlayStations at cost. Where they made their money, in the exact opposite of the situation on the Nintendo, where pretty much the only people who were making games for the Nintendo were Nintendo. Sony allowed absolutely anybody to make games for the PlayStation, as long as they paid Sony a fee. So, by selling the PlayStation as cheaply as they did, they got PlayStations into millions of homes, and they made their money from a cut of the sales of all of the PlayStation games, of which there were thousands. It's all about getting your foot in the door. I mean, it sounds really obvious to say it, but if you never create an Epic Games Store account, you're never going to spend money buying games on the Epic Games Store. And it's people exactly like me, and I suspect a lot of you, that Epic are targeting. That's why they're taking the hit to their own pocket by offering a greater slice of the profits to the games developers. That's why they're throwing massive paychecks around to get games like Metro Exodus, Phoenix Point, and Borderlands 3 to sign Epic Games Store exclusive contracts. And the sheer amount of money that Epic must be spending in order to entice people like me into actually taking that first step, getting my foot into the door and creating a store account, the money must be absolutely astronomical. Because as well as getting developers to sign exclusive deals and giving developers a bigger share of the profits of any sales. And on top of that, they've also very recently gone one step further and have just announced the very first Epic Store sale. And it's a big one, with up to 75% discounts on selected game titles. Now, all of this sounds like fantastic news to the customer, but as usual, there's slightly more to it than that. And in fact, this is where things start to turn a bit comical. First things first, all of the money that isn't being made by selling games with a 75% discount is not going to affect the developers. Epic are taking the hit to their own pocket on this one. They've basically subsidised this entire sale out of their own pockets. And before you start thinking, wow, that's very generous of them, the reason they're doing this is because they kind of have to. Because they haven't bothered asking any of the game developers whether or not they want their games to go on sale in the first place. Yes, you heard that right. They have just decided, off their own bat, yeah, we're going to put all these games on sale, whether you want us to or not. And any developers who might have objections to their game being put on sale without their consent, and in some cases games that haven't even been released yet are being put on sale without the developer's consent, are basically being told, tough, check the terms of your contract. But here's where things get really silly. So, Epic Games Store, all kinds of exclusive games that you can only get at the Epic Games Store, and there's a massive sale on. So naturally, everybody who has an Epic Games account is buying games at the store. I mean, 75% discounts, why wouldn't you? This, however, is where the first problem rears its ugly head. Because I don't know if any of you out there have actually used the Epic Games Store, but it's a bit shit. That's putting it mildly. I mean, you can say what you like about Steam, and there are all kinds of bad things you could say about Steam, but the actual process of shopping on Steam is fairly straightforward. It's simple, it's transparent, it's easy. Buying a game on the Epic Store, not so much. For one thing, and this is going to sound hard to believe, but it's absolutely 100% true, the Epic Store doesn't even have a shopping cart. Yeah, I know. It's an online games retailer that doesn't even have a shopping cart in the 21st century. I swear I'm not making this up. It's on the roadmap. Oh yeah, it's on the roadmap for things that they want to have, but they're not in any particular rush to implement it. When they published the roadmap, the shopping cart was still 6 months away. Yeah, in an online games retailer. Really. And then in a stroke of genius, without even having a shopping cart in place in their store, they announced a 75% off mega sale. Now, I don't work in the games retail industry, but even I can see how that might go horribly, horribly wrong. If you want to buy a bunch of games during the Epic Mega Sale, you have to buy each one individually, one at a time. Alright, Jingles, I can see how that's actually quite funny, and a massive pain in the arse, but it's not exactly a deal breaker, is it? Well, you'd think so, but here's the kicker. They haven't yet bothered to put a shopping cart in place, but they do have some anti-fraud measures. You can see what's coming now, can't you? That's right. Anti-fraud measures, which are designed to track irregular spending patterns and suspend the accounts of potential wrongdoers in order to protect your pocket. Irregular spending patterns, for example, such as somebody logging into the store and suddenly buying one game after the other, over and over and over. Why might that happen? Oh, I don't know. Maybe they've got a store that doesn't have a shopping cart, and they've just announced a 75% discount sale, without bothering to clear it with any of the games developers. Oh yeah, I can see how that might happen. Oh my god. Yes, reports are coming in of people getting their Epic Store accounts suspended and their credit and debit cards blocked after taking advantage of the 75% discount sale by doing exactly that. Logging into the store and buying all the games that they want one at a time because there's no shopping cart. I swear I am not making this up. It is too funny to be untrue. You know, I don't know how much money Epic gave to Randy Pitchford to make him sign an exclusive contract with the Epic Store for Borderlands 3, but I'm going to suggest that maybe if they'd paid them $50,000 less, they could have had a shopping cart in the store in time for this 75% discount sale, and I wouldn't be laughing my ass off at them. I'm just saying. Anyway, that one greatly amused me this week, and hopefully it's amused you too, unless, you're unfortunate enough to have been trying to buy games during the sale at the Epic Store. Anyway, on with your questions. This one comes from Asuka Bliat, and he says, "Morning Jingles, I saw that Theresa May recently resigned. I know that you prefer to stay away from politics in your videos, but I'm interested to hear your opinion on this." For those of you who have no idea who he's talking about, Theresa May is the British Prime Minister. She very recently resigned, although she is still Prime Minister until somebody's picked to replace her. She became Prime Minister when the previous Prime Minister, David Cameron, dropped the UK into a massive pot of shit called Brexit, and then realising he didn't know what to do about it, quit, washed his hands of it, and left it up to somebody else to sort out. That somebody else was Theresa May. She then spent almost the next 3 years of her premiership coming up with a plan for Brexit, presenting it to Parliament, Parliament turning around and telling her, "Your plan is dog shit, go away and come back with something that will actually work," and then coming back with what was essentially exactly the same plan and saying, "Go on, approve it this time, please." In fact, just about the only thing of note that occurred during her entire premiership happened on the 4th of December 2018 on a motion passed by members of Parliament by 311 to 293 votes. Theresa May's government was found to be in contempt of Parliament. The first time this has ever occurred in British history. And if you're wondering what contempt of Parliament is, it's basically exactly like contempt of court. Like, for example, you've all watched legal dramas when a lawyer's been found in contempt of court because he's refused to do what the judge tells him to do. And the judge is entitled to fine the lawyer or imprison them. Parliament kind of used to be like that. It was basically the highest court in the land. This was a long time ago. And yet it still has the power to hold somebody in contempt. Nobody's actually been fined as a result of being found in contempt of Parliament since the 17th century, and Parliament hasn't actually imprisoned anybody since the late 1800s, but it still has the power to fine somebody in contempt. And this is the first time a government has ever been found in contempt of Parliament. So what exactly does that mean? Well, nothing really. It's a mark of just how incredibly toothless British politics is, that Parliament can find the government to be in contempt of Parliament, but there are no actual penalties associated with it. It's just extremely embarrassing. But that's pretty much it. That's pretty much the only thing that Theresa May's government has actually done of note in the not quite 3 years that she's been in power. So, what do I think of the news that she's resigned? I've got to be brutally honest with you here. Whether Theresa May resigns, stays in power, or embarks on a second career as a clown in a travelling circus, I don't see any of that affecting the cost of a pint of milk. In the grand scheme of things, she has really just not been that important. Other than setting the most embarrassing parliamentary precedent in British governmental history, she has achieved absolutely nothing in nearly 3 years as being Prime Minister. After leaving the office, every year for the rest of her life of not being the Prime Minister, she will achieve exactly the same as she achieved in the 3 years that she was the Prime Minister. Really, in the grand scheme of things, she just was not that important. Next question comes from Sir Blake. He says, "Jingles, it's been quite some time since you did a museum video. Aren't you willing to do any more of them?" You know what? It's funny you should ask that question. Yes, you're right. It has been quite some time. Far too long. And in fact, Rita has been on my back to get out there and actually do some more. And I've actually also very recently invested in, I'm not entirely sure what you'd call it, a wireless microphone, basically. It hasn't arrived yet, although I'm hoping it's going to be here for the 12th of June, because on the 12th of June, myself and my good friend Roy who poses as my stunt double at various events like Tankfest, are taking a road trip down Hell's Highway. We're redoing Operation Market Garden, although hopefully with less death and explosions. The route that 30 Core took, across the various bridges at Eindhoven, Nijmegen, and eventually ending up in Arnhem, the legendary bridge too far. And the reason I want this wireless microphone setup is, well, I don't know if you've seen particularly my Tankfest videos, especially when it's been windy, even with noise reduction equipment on my shotgun microphone, there's still a lot of wind noise, and there's often a lot of background noise in the various different museums when I'm standing in front of something interesting and talking about it. And yet there wasn't in my Top 5 Tanks video for the Tank Museum. And the reason there wasn't in the Top 5 Tanks Museum, Top 5 Tanks video for the Tank Museum, was because it was filmed on their camera and using their microphone setup. And they basically had a wireless microphone. You know those little throat microphones or tie-pin microphones that you see people wearing when they're being interviewed on the news. One of those plugged into a transmitter, which is attached to your belt or wherever, out of the way, sending a wireless signal to a receiver, which is attached to your camera, which means I can have the camera 15 meters away, far enough away that you can see the whole thing that I'm standing next to and talking about, but the sound is actually being recorded right next to my throat. So you can actually hear me. I don't have to run the sound through filters to drown out the background noise or try to get rid of the wind or so on and so on. Potentially also I could be sitting inside a tank with my head sticking out of the hatch, being driven around while somebody's standing 40 meters away with a camera, recording me in the tank and being able to hear me talking as I'm in the tank. So all kinds of useful applications in this transmitter receiver wireless microphone setup thingy. And I bought it specifically so that I can get out there and actually do some slightly more professional sounding videos in various different museums and on road trips to, well, wet and windy Dutch roads in the middle of nowhere, where I can stand there in the wind talking about something that happened 70 years ago and you'll be able to hear me perfectly. So yeah, short question, very long answer, which is fairly typical of me. You all know me by now. But yes, the short answer is definitely there will be more museum videos coming up. In fact, Rita was recently over in Portsmouth and picked up a brochure of all the different military historical attractions in the Hampshire area. There's a lot more around here than even I was aware of. So yes, definitely many more museum videos coming reasonably soon. Anyway, it's getting late. I need to get this rendered and uploaded, ready for publication tomorrow on Monday. So we're going to put this one to bed. I have to be up early tomorrow. We're taking Akazuki to the vet. Don't worry, it's perfectly routine. She was in for surgery last week to get the snip. She's going in to have a checkup. She's absolutely fine. The stitches have held. She's got her appetite back. She's doing really well, but the vet obviously wants to check. She's wearing a little sort of onesie. I've got a picture of it somewhere. Here it is. It was this, or one of those, you know, the cone of shame, the Elizabethan collars. But I just know those things are cruel. They make it difficult for the pet to feed themselves as well. And she's absolutely totally rocking that onesie. I mean, she's totally killing it. Absolutely nailing the thing. So, yeah, well done to her. She'll be wearing it until around about the 10th of June, when it finally comes off and we take it back for another checkup just to make sure that everything's gone well. And hopefully, until she goes for a vaccination boosters next year, that'll be the last time she sees the inside of the vets, because she's really growing to not like it very much. But anyway, that ought to come tomorrow. That's it for this week's episode of Mingles with Jingles. I hope you've enjoyed it. And as always, take care, and I'll catch you next time.